The first game is off the books. He started with e4. I'm going to play e5. And he plays an early queen attack. What a great way to start this video. Let me show you guys how to punish this. Now, clearly he's attacking the pawn. I'll develop my knight, simply guard the pawn. And I'm assuming he's going to play bishop to c4. Now, whenever they do this, he's trying to do the four-move checkmate or the scholar's mate or the shepherd's mate. Don't play knight f6 and get checkmated on f7. You must play pawn to g6, intercepting the fact that the queen is attacking f7. Now the queen has to move away. He now pulls his queen back to f3. He is still threatening a checkmate on f7. And to defend against this, we're just going to ensure that we follow principles. So I'm just going to simply develop my knight here. And let's see how he continues. In this speed run, I'm going to ensure that I use as much openings as possible so everyone is able to benefit from it. I'm going to ensure that I teach you guys everything that I know about chess. And that way you guys know where exactly to find your knowledge in only one video. So he plays knight e2, developing his knight makes some sense. And what I like to tell you guys is please do not put your bishop anywhere else apart from g7, because the fact that you play g6 means you're going to go bishop to g7 and fianchet up your bishop. After this, we're just going to get our king castled. He castled. We're also going to get castled. Now I have only one piece that needs development, which is my bishop on c8. And then he plays the move queen to b3. Now, that's also a mistake. Now, the first thing I want to teach you guys is this is called a drawback mistake. Before you move a piece, you want to ensure that you ask yourself, what was this piece doing before I move it? His queen was actually guarding the pawn on e4. Now that he moves the queen to b3, it's no longer guarding the pawn on e4, which means knight takes e4 is just a free pawn. In addition to that, he's moving his queen more than once and he's moving his queen out too early. He needs to focus on developing his knight and his bishop. Now he decides to play pawn c3. That's another mistake. In chess, we call this an unnecessary pawn move. In the opening stage of the game, it's very important that you get all four minor pieces out. He's not getting his pieces out. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to ensure that I develop my light squared bishop. However, I'm going to find a very creative way to develop my bishop so that way I gain something that is called tempo or the initiative. For example, I could simply play pawn to d6 and get my bishop up. But if you're able to develop a piece and force the opponent to react to your move at the same time, it basically means you have the move. So I'm going to play the move knight a5, forking the queen and the bishop. And then once the queen move, I'll take the bishop because bishops are better than knights. And then I'll be able to develop my bishop with a tempo. Another thing that I want to teach you guys is do not be putting your knight on the edge of the board because knights on the rim is dim. You should only put your knights on the edge of the board if your plan is to remove it from the edge of the board on your next move. Now his queen is going to obviously take my knight, and now it gives me the chance to develop my bishop with tempo. Basically, to develop my bishop, I'm going to play the move pawn to d5, attacking the opponent's queen, protecting my knight, opening this diagonal for my bishop. And then he pulls his queen back to b3. Now, because I'm aware of the drawback principle, I'm not going to just develop my bishop and leave my pawn on b6 hanging. So, because I don't like the fact that his queen is on b7, I'm going to start by playing the move knight to c5. It is attacking his queen. And the more you can have the opponent reacting to your moves, then it's always going to be better. I also want you guys to notice how I have two very strong pawns in the center of the board. He pulls his queen back to c2, and then now I'm able to develop my bishop with tempo on his queen, which means he still has to react to my move. If you're able to force your opponent always reacting to your move, then that's all you need. Now keep in mind, the d1 square is the only square for the queen, so he has to find that move. So he pulls his queen back to d1, and I noticed that he's not developing his pieces. Now, I already developed my minor pieces, and it's obvious that he wants to play pawn to b4, develop his bishop. So I'm not going to allow him to play pawn to b4. I'm going to play pawn to d4. Now, this is called a pawn break. You usually should do a pawn break after you complete your development because pawn breaks allows you to open more lines for your pieces. Notice what happens after this trade. The e file is now open, and then I'm going to be able to get my rook on the e file, which means another thing that I want to teach you guys is I like to just spill out random tips. Hopefully you guys like it. Basically, After you develop your minor pieces, development is actually not complete until you develop your major pieces. So you still want to ensure that you develop everything. Now, he plays knight to f4. Now, it really looks like he wants to play pawn to d3, but I want to set up a little tactic to win a pawn. Now, first of all, this is called an unprotected piece. This is how you know whenever there's a target that you can attack in the opponent's position. I'm going to play the move queen to d6. Not only am I attacking the unprotected knight, I'm also connecting my rooks. Now, this is the sign that your development is complete and you can start your attack. Your king and your two rooks should be the only two pieces left on the background. So he moves his queen again to protect his knight. And now I'm trying to figure out how can I remove the queen from guarding the knight. With that being said, I'm already thinking of playing bishop to e4 here, attacking his queen, and the queen would have to go to g3, and then I'm thinking of bishop to e5, but then he's able to play pawn to d3. So what I'm going to do is I'm still going to play bishop to e4 and attack the queen, but if the queen moves to g3, I'm going to play pawn to d3 and just keep his bishop locked in for the entire game. Okay, he plays queen to h3. He did not try to keep his knight guarded. And the thing is, though, I'm not completely winning the knight. That's the thing. Because if I take the knight in this position, he actually has, this is called a discovered attack, by the way, where he's going to play the move pawn to d3, which means his bishop attacks my queen, his pawn attacks my bishop. I'm going to be forced to move my queen, and then he's going to be taking my bishop. However, I'm still going to take the knight because it basically means I'm going to be winning a free pawn. Once he plays pawn to d3, a discovered attack on my queen, I'm just going to move my queen away. And then once he takes my bishop, I take his pawn. So let's just move the queen back to d6. If he takes the bishop, take the pawn. Nice. Now I'm already ahead by 2 points. And once you're ahead in material, you want to start trading pieces off the board. My opponent still hasn't developed any of his pieces. He needs to develop. Even though his knight is not able to go here, he needs to at least put it on the edge of the board and then put it on c4. My plan from here is to advance my pass pawn and turn it into a queen. But I also noticed that my rooks aren't doing anything. So if I had a rook on e8 and a rook on d8, that would be good. So he did find knight to a3, so that's not bad. Now I'm thinking, do I start advancing my pass pawn? So for example, I play d3, he goes knight c4, or do I just get my rook into the game? The more principled move in this position is to get one of the rooks in the game, but the more aggressive move is to play pawn to d3 because I'm already threatening to play pawn to d2, which would trap his bishop. Now, a lot of you guys ask me, how do you find the best move in chess? Now, to find the best move in chess, you should just look for moves where you could put one of your pieces on the opponent's half of the board. That's going to help you a lot. Now, knight to b5 is actually a very nice move. I was actually expecting him to play knight c4. And the thing is, I wanted to play queen to d5 and hit the knight, but then there's a fork here. I'm still going to try to make it work though. So let's say I go queen to d5. He takes, thinking he's forking my queen and my rook, and then I pull my queen back to d8, hit the knight. If he takes my rook, I push. That's not worth it. Let's just pull the knight back, the queen back to d8. A move that I don't want to play. I wanted to play something like queen c6, but it would leave my pawn unprotected. And it's very important that you guys are aware of the drawback principle. Now, once I manage to play pawn to d2, that will win me a piece. So let's see how he's going to defend against this. Bishop to f4 was played. He develops his bishop and he's attacking on c7. That's not bad at all, by the way. But all he's doing is attacking the pawn. So I'm actually able to just move the pawn. And then once I move the pawn, his knight is under attack. And if he still wants to put the knight on c7, then his knight will actually be trapped, which is why he puts his knight on c3. However, my opponent did not count accurately in this scenario. Now, what I mean by that is he has only his pawn, one piece is guarding c3. I have one, two pieces guarding c3, which means once I take on c3 and he takes, I'm going to be able to take. Now, knights are not better than bishops. Bishops are better than knights. But in this particular situation, I'm going to actually choose to use my bishop to take on c3. And the reason why I'm going to do this is because once he takes and my knight protects the square that I'm trying to queen on, and I'm threatening knight to e2, which would be a fork on the king and the bishop. So he has to find a very good way to react to this. Now, he plays the move queen to h6. Now, I don't know if he accidentally found the move because Obviously, he wants to play bishop to e5 and threaten my knight and threaten the checkmate. So queen h6 was a decent move. If I check and he moves, the queen guards the bishop. So I'm not going to necessarily play knight e7 check. The threat is always better than the execution. And especially since my rooks are not in the game, this is definitely a good time to play a move like rook to e8, getting my rook in the game. And I'm also preventing the move bishop to e5. Okay, he plays rook to e1, and if I takes and the rook takes, I'm still not able to push because the queen and the bishop covers the square. Now he still wants to play the move bishop to e5, so I can't allow bishop to e5. I'm only currently protecting the e5 square once. So if he plays bishop to e5, he will be threatening a checkmate. What I'll do though is I'm just going to protect the e5 square another time. Now I'm going to play the move queen to d5. Queen to d5, it connects my rook. I could always swing the other rook in the game, so that way I'm able to push my passed pawn, and he's also not able to play bishop here. He traded on e8, which is something that I want to talk to you guys about. To take is a mistake. You should only trade when it improves your position. Oh, I only have a minute on the clock, and I want to ensure that I add the entire speed run, so I'm talking a bit too much. So he pulls the bishop back. He's also trying to flag me. Let's go here, hit the bishop. I'm planning on taking the bishop and then put my rook here, hit his bishop, and then queen my pawn. So he moves the bishop. Now I'm able to play pawn to d2, and this is completely winning. If he moves the bishop, I'm going to queen my pawn, which he did move the bishop, but he puts the bishop on b2, which means he's threatening a checkmate. So I also have to be careful. But all I need to do in this position is play the move pawn to f6, cutting off the communication between the queen and the bishop. And then now I'm still threatening to play pawn to d1. Now he is able to play rook to d1, which is an interesting move, but I also have a very interesting move. I want you guys to notice how his back rank is weak, which means if I'm able to get my rook on e1, that will be a checkmate. So how I'm gonna make this work is I'm actually gonna wait. If I play here, takes, check, takes. Oh, that actually does not work. I thought this worked. It doesn't work. Okay, let's just play knight to g5, actually, because the queen no longer attacks the pawn. The rook is obviously not able to take, and I'm now threatening a checkmate, which he missed. He took, thinking he's threatening a mate, hitting my knight. But once I play rook to e1, there's nothing he could do to prevent a checkmate. Because in this position, the rook has to take, and that's a checkmate. Now we're playing the next game. Let's start by playing e4. And we're not playing against a Scandinavian defense. Whenever they do this, we always want to take on d5 because once the queen takes, the Scandinavian defense actually breaks one of the opening principles that says you should not develop your queen too early, which is why I'm developing my pieces and attacking the opponent's queen. Now, any checks like this that people play in the Scandinavian defense is bad. The best move is to play queen a5, or at least just pull the queen back, because now the opponent is actually helping me to develop my pieces. If you notice, I already have two pieces developed, and all he has is a queen that has developed too early. And because he develops his queen too early, I'm going to be able to develop my pieces and gain tempo or time on the opponent's queen. So, for example, now that he plays knight f6, which is a development move, I'm able to play the move knight to f3, developing my knight and attacking the queen at the same time. Now, he has to move the queen, which means I already have three pieces developed. He only has one piece to develop. With that being said, he's at least two moves behind. Then the guy puts his queen on f4. I think he's just trying to allow me to have a very instructive lesson for you guys, because that's definitely not the square for the queen. Because again, he's wasting even more time. What am I going to do? I'm going to simply play a move that assists me in developing and attack at the same time. Pawn to d4. I'm controlling the center, but this is a discovered attack on the opponent's queen. Now he has to move the queen again, which means he's at least three or four moves behind. And then once I get my king castled and develop my bishop, then I'm going to be in the middle game. He's going to still be in the opening. So he pulls his queen back to d6. And I'm thinking of playing knight b5 and just starting my attack, to be honest. But because I'm a very principled man, let me get my king out the center of the board first. Now that my king is castled, three of my pieces are developed. I'm definitely going to start my attack. And even if I don't develop my bishop right now, I'm still permitted to start my attack because I have such a huge lead in development. Okay, he finally develops one of his pieces. So now he has two pieces developed, but the king is still in the center of the board. Now, what I tell my students is if your king is out the center of the board and your opponent's king is in the center, you should try to open the center. There's no pawn breaks that I could do right now. So I'm going to hit him with the move knight to b5, which means I'm threatening the queen. And he has to be careful where he puts the queen. Because if he moves the queen too far, then he's going to lose his c7 pawn, which will result in a 4. And by the way, a very good way to learn from this video, because I really want to ensure that I help so much people with this video, is to every now and again, if there's a text on the screen that says there's a tactic here or what should I play, try to pause the video and find the move. For example, queen to b4, horrible move by the way. Another reason why you should not be developing your queen too early, because knight c7 is already a fork winning a rook. But I'm trying to get more out of the situation. Like, I'm actually thinking of playing bishop to d2 just to force him to move the queen again. But then he takes my pawn here. But then I have rook to b1. That's an open file. And then the queen has to go here. And then I'll check and win. Ah, do I do that? Okay, that's a nice idea. But let's just go for the fork. This is called a fork for my absolute beginners who's watching this. The knight is hitting both the king and the rook at the same time. And because the king is in check, the king has to move out the way. And then once the king moves out the way, now I'm able to take the rook. Now I'm ahead by 6 points. If you're playing a chess game and you're ahead in material, the goal from there is to start trading as much pieces off the board. The more you trade, the easier it is for you to play and the harder it is for the opponent to play. And then he plays knight to e4. Now, although he's completely losing, he's just still breaking a lot of opening principles. Please don't be playing chess like this guy. If you notice what he's doing, he's moving his queen so many times. He's not castling his king, which is not able to get castled anymore. And the knight was already developed. He needs to focus on getting this bishop up. Now, what I'm thinking of is just finally completing my bishop, attacking the unprotected knight, but I have a feeling it's just going to help him to develop his knight, and I'm just going to be telling the guy to develop his knight. So instead, I'm going to play the move knight to e5, putting a piece on the opponent's half of the board. The best move on the chessboard and the best tactical moves on the chessboard is usually like 80% on the opponent's half of the board. So whenever you're thinking, this is how I want you guys to be thinking. You should be thinking aggressively in terms of how do I put pieces on the opponent's half of the board? How do I invade the opponent's territory? Now, you should be thinking defensively in terms of how do I get rid of pieces on my half of the board? How do I not allow pieces on my half of the board? That's how you want your thinking process to go. So knight e5 was actually to threaten a fork here and neutralize this bishop. And once the bishop takes, he's helping me to take, which attacks the knight, which means I'm also neutralizing the knight. Now, once he moves the knight or protects the knight, well, that's the best square to put the knight. I was about to say if he does not put the knight here, I was gonna be winning the f7 pawn with a fork, but he found the move, so that's not bad. Which means from here, let's just continue with my development. Now, definitely need to develop this bishop. I'm thinking of bishop to d2. I also want to sacrifice some pawns. For example, I don't mind if his queen takes here because it's going to open the d file for my rook. So I'm actually going to play bishop to d2 here. I also don't mind if the queen takes here because once I play rook to b1, it opens the b file for my rook. And because I'm ahead by 6 points, losing one pawn is not going to kill me. So he plays queen takes d4. Now, here's what I'm going to do. He's not necessarily attacking anything. So I'm actually going to just continue to get more pieces in the game. I'm going to play the move rook to d1. Now, you guys want to ensure that you move every single piece. Not pawns though. I said piece. I didn't say pawn. Pawn is not a piece. So he just plays pawn to f6. And just like that, I have a very nice tactic. Now, again, if something pops up on the screen, pause the video and try to find it. But this is called a discovered attack. I want you guys to notice how my rook is on the same line as the opponent's queen. And because my rook is on the same line as the opponent's queen, all I need to do to win the queen is just move my bishop out the way. But if I just put my bishop on a random square, it is going to give the opponent time, which is the most important thing in chess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for moves that I can play on the opponent's half of the board. And the moves that you're looking for on the opponent's half of the board is usually a check, a capture, or a threat in that order. So I'm going to hit him with bishop to b5, checking the king. The bishop checks the king. The rook attacks the queen. He now has to react to the fact that his king is in check. And then I'm just going to grab the queen. He plays pawn to b6, attacking my bishop. But let's just grab the queen. And it's actually better for him here to take my knight. He took my bishop I really hope you guys are learning because there's another tactic in this position. I want you guys to notice how the rook is on the same line as the king. And because the opponent's piece is in the way, it basically means the knight is pinned. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind that a pinned piece does not protect. So because a pinned piece does not protect, I'm actually able to play the move knight to f7 for king, the king and the rook. The knight is no longer able to take because of the spin. So he has to move the king out of the way, and then I'll just grab the rook. However, when you're playing chess, whenever you find a good move, always look for a better one. That's a rook. The rook is not running away. I'm going to try to see if I'm able to find a checkmate. So I'm thinking check on b5. And again, pin pieces doesn't protect, so the knight isn't able to take. And if the king goes to e6, I check on d5. And then the king has to go here. Then I take the rook. Did that make any difference though? But let's go for it. Let's check on b5. The king has to move. If he puts the king here, maybe there's some checkmate because I have so many pieces in the attack. But if he allows my queen to get to b5, okay, he puts the king here. And again, I'm covering this square. He's attacking my knight, not seeing a mate. So I'm going to check here, protect my knight, force his king to go to this square. And because I'm not seeing any checkmate, I'm just going to grab the rook. So let's grab the rook. I'm now ahead by 16 points. So every trade in this position is a good trade. Now, if you're ahead by 16 points, even sacrificing your rook for a knight usually qualifies for a good trade. Now, the opponent plays the move pawn to e6. It is attacking my queen. The move that I'm going to play in this position is queen to b7 check. Now, I know it looks weird. The knight is just never able to take my queen because remember what I tell you guys, pin pieces does not protect. Now from here, I'm trying to find a checkmate. So what I'm going to do here is his knight is actually guarding the f7 square now. I mean, that's a free knight, by the way, but I'm just trying to find the quickest way. Actually, let's take the free knight. Let's take the free knight because his king is not able to run here, which means the king has to run here. And then there's a checkmate in two moves in this position. So first, I'm going to start by taking the knight with check. The king is not able to go here. The king has to go here, which means queen takes d8 will be a checkmate. So let's play the move queen takes d6 check. The king now has to go here, and that's just a checkmate. So our next opponent plays e4, and as I promised you guys, I'm going to try to play a lot of different openings. I already played e5, so now I'm going to be playing the Caro-Kann defense. Now the Caro-Kann defense is a very, very solid line. You play pawn to c6, the opponent develops a piece, and then you play the move pawn to d5, and then now we're trying to gain some control over the center of the board. The opponent plays the move knight to f3. Now, this is called the two knights variation of the Caro-Kann. Whenever this happens, we're going to take the pawn on e4 because we're basically trying to force the opponent to break opening principles. Notice how he's moving the same piece more than once? Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to play the move knight to f6, just developing my pieces. And if I could get him to move this knight, which he did, now all I want you guys to do here is simple mathematics. How many times did he move the knight? One, two, three times. How many times did I move my knight? Once. And then I'm going to take. With that being said, white actually wasted two moves in this position. From here, it's going to be very simple development. My opponent just made a mistake by developing the bishop. I know it sounds weird, but you should not be putting your bishop in front of your central pawns because now he's going to be having problems developing his dark squared bishop. All I'm going to do in this position is play the move bishop to d6. Now I'm developing my bishop. I'm not blocking out any of my pawns. What's my goal in the opening? Castle my king, develop all my pieces. Black decided to castle the king. Now well, white castle the king. I'm going to also castle the king. This is a very typical structure in the Caro-Kann defense, by the way. And what is my plan from here? Is it to attack the king? No, it's to complete my development. Do not start your attack if your development is not complete. Now, the opponent plays pawn to h3 in this position, which was a very good move. This is called a prophylactic move. Basically, he knows that I wanted to get my bishop on the g4 square, and he plays pawn to h3, preventing my bishop from going on the g4 square. However, it doesn't really change a lot. I'm going to still continue to develop my pieces. For now, I'm not going to develop the bishop. I'm going to play the move knight to d7 with the whole idea of playing maybe knight to c5 or rook to e8, knight f8. So that way, I'll be finally able to develop my bishop. My opponent plays pawn to c4, which is, well, it's not necessarily a mistake. I guess he wants to pull his bishop back so that way he's able to play d4. So, because I was thinking of playing knight c5, hits the bishop, but if he pulls it back, then d4 becomes a threat. I'm also thinking of playing knight e5, and then after the trade, I simply take with my bishop. And then if he pulls his bishop back, I'm able to play pawn c5. I also like that idea. Let's go knight to e5 because I obviously want to develop my bishop. E6 is also a good square to put the bishop. The knight takes, now my bishop takes, and then once my bishop takes, it is a discovered attack on his bishop, which is unprotected. So if he does not continue with his plan, which he didn't, which means that was not his plan, and he left his bishop unprotected. Now, not only did he left his bishop unprotected, he broke another principle in chess, which means you should not be moving the pawns on the side that your king is on, which is why this guy's going to be getting checkmated. Because look at the difference between the pawns on the side that my king is on and the pawns on the side that his king is on. Because he's moving the pawns on the side that his king is on, he's weakening his pawns. By moving the g pawn, this pawn is unprotected. Boom, that's a free pawn. By moving the f pawn, this pawn is unprotected. Boom, that's a free pawn. And this is called the drawback principle, by the way. Now, I have so many ways to win this game. I could take this with check, king has to move, grab this, but then the rook goes here, and I'm not really seeing my checkmate. I'm also thinking of taking here first, but then he actually has rook to f3. So let's actually take on g3, and then I'm going to say check. The king has to go to h1. Now, once the king goes to h1, I'm thinking of taking on h3 with the queen, not the bishop, even though it's good to bring more pieces in the attack. Taking with the bishop is also good because if the rook goes here, I'm just going to pull my queen back to h4, and that will lead to a checkmate. But if I take with the queen and the king goes here, I'm able to play the move bishop to d4 check. He's going to be forced to block with his rook, which is going to be pinned. And then I'm not going to take the rook. I'm going to put the queen back to g3, checking his king. If the king goes to f1, I take on f2, and that's a checkmate. And if the king goes to h1, I go bishop takes rook. That's a free rook. And queen to h3 is going to be a checkmate. Let's take the pawn. I knew that was a lot to swallow, but you guys are going to be able to see it. I just wanted to put it on the board so that way you try to at least solve it on your own, assuming you're answering to the text that I may leave on the screen. Now, if you notice, his king has no squares to go, so he has to block with the rook. Now, once he blocks with the rook, we're not in any rush to take the rook. Whenever a piece is pinned, we want to ensure that we PP on the PP. What that means, we're going to play the move queen to g3, checking the king, hitting the rook, putting pressure on the pinned piece. If the king goes to f1, which he did, that's just a checkmate. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. Now, my opponent plays e4. We played e5. We played the Caro-Kann. Now, I'm going to be playing the Scandinavian defense. At least, well, he didn't really accept the Scandinavian defense, so this could actually be transposed into a Caro-Kann. Now, because he plays e5, I'm actually going to play the move bishop to f5. And this is actually very, very similar to the Caro-Kann. Just imagine you play c6 followed by d5, and the opponent did not take and they push past. It's basically the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann. Now, I'm actually going to play pawn to c5 here. So forget about the fact that I said I was playing the Sicilian defense. Just imagine I'm playing the Caro-Kann because something just happened that is called transposition. You can actually play one opening and it transposed into another opening. So he plays pawn to c3. And let's just play knight to c6 here. The goal in the Caro-Kann defense is to apply as much pressure to the opponent's d4 pawn. So bishop to d3 was played. If you're playing the Caro-Kann, you're always going to be trading off your light squared bishop. So let's take on d3. Yes, he's going to take with the queen. And then after he takes with the queen, I'm going to play the move pawn to e6. Now, something that I want you guys to know about the Caro-Kann is what do we do with our kingside pieces? Just remember, the knight on h8 goes to f5. Why? Because the goal is to target the d4 pawn. The bishop usually goes to e7 and you simply castle your king. So I'm going to start by simply taking the pawn on d4. The opponent has to take back, which means the pawn on d4 becomes a weak pawn. Now, because the pawn on d4 is a weak pawn, my goal for the entire game is going to be targeting this weak pawn. So being a Caro-Kann player, feel free to play knight e7 to f5 or knight h6 to f5. Your queen could also go to b6 and just keep targeting this weak d4 pawn. So the opponent plays knight to c3, developing his knight. Now I'm going to play the move knight to f5. And yes, I'm moving the same piece more than once in the opening stage of the game. But I also want you guys to keep in mind that whenever the position is closed, and when I say a closed position, it basically means there's a traffic jam of pawns in the center of the board. Whenever the position is closed, time actually becomes less important. So the opponent decided to develop the knight, And I'm just going to be continuing with my development here. Now, I could play bishop to e7 and castle the king, but I could also play queen to b6 and apply some pressure to d4. And I could also play rook to c8. Now, being a Caracan player or a French player, you're kind of always going to want to put your rook on this open c file. My opponent just played the move pawn to g4, which is a very nice move, by the way. I forgot that there's one more thing I want to teach you guys in the Caracan, where whenever the knight is on f5, sometimes you could play pawn to h5 to ensure that you don't allow g4. But then if they do play g4, it doesn't mean that it's bad or you're losing or anything because he is weakening his king. Now, with that being said, I'm actually going to play such a nice move. Now, it could be a brilliant move. It could also be a blunder. I'm thinking of sacrificing my knight on d4. And then if the knight takes, I play knight takes d4. And then if the queen takes, I'm able to check. And then once he moves the king, I'm able to develop my bishop with a tempo on the queen, threatening a checkmate on f2. And then he's able to play queen to a5 check, though. That's the thing. But then once I move my king, how is he going to prevent a checkmate? Maybe queen c2? Hey, we're going for it. Let's play knight takes d4. It's a very interesting move. Let's see how the opponent reacts to it. Now, after knight takes, I could actually check on h4 first. Because if I check on h4 first and he decides to block with the queen, I take the queen, take back the knight, and just like that, I'm ahead by a pawn. But if I check on h4 and he moves the king, then I'll take and play bishop to c5. So either way, it's fine for me. So let's check on h4 first. He has to react to this check. And if he moves his queen to g3, once I trade the queen, the knight is now unprotected, which he did. That's an unprotected knight. So now I'm going to take on g3, trading the queens off the board. Remember what I told you guys about the Caracan? The d4 pawn is the main target in the advanced variation of the Caracan. So if the opponent plays the advanced variation, ensure that you put all your pieces targeting the d4 pawn. Now that he takes, we take on d4, and just like that, we won the d4 pawn. Not only that, I'm also threatening to fork on c2. So if he's not careful, my knight goes to c2 and that's a fork, which is why he plays rook to b1, which means if I check, that's not a fork and I'll just get nothing from that check. With that being said though, I'm just going to continue with my development. My bishop is the only piece that's not doing anything. Let's just develop the bishop, pinning the opponent's knight, especially since my rook is already applying pressure to the knight. He has to be careful here. Now, the opponent decided to play king to d2 instead of bishop to d2. Very weird, in my opinion. And just like that, I should be at least winning a pawn in this position. Now, what did I tell you guys about when a piece is pinned? If a piece is pinned, you have to PP on the PP. So because the knight is pinned, I'm going to play the move knight to b5. Looks like my knight is hanging, but he's not able to take the knight because pinned pieces does not protect. On my next move, I'm going to take on c3 because now I have one, two, three pieces targeting his c3 pawn. So he plays pawn to a3. Yes, he's attacking my bishop, but now I'm just going to play the move knight takes c3. It's not a check, but his rook is under attack. He decided to take my bishop, which was bad. Now I'm going to take his rook. And just like that, I'm ahead by 6 points. It's also a check, so his king has to move. And then once he moves the king, I'm going to get my king out the center of the board. And by the way, castling in chess does not necessarily only means get your king to safety, which it does. It also means it bring your other rook into the game because in the end game, you don't necessarily have to castle. In fact, I could actually play a move like king to d7 here, but castling is fine. He develops his bishop, and it is a discovered attack on my knight. But to protect my knight here, if you notice my knight is trapped and has nowhere to go, but a very nice way to protect my knight is rook to c2 check. I check the opponent's king, and then after the king move, I take the pawn on b2, successfully guarding my knight. Now, he plays bishop to d4. He's trying to do a removing the guard tactic, where if I move my rook away to a place, then he's going to take my knight. But I'm just going to take on b4. Wait, am I going to take on b4? That's a fork. And then I check him here. And then if he goes here, I win the bishop. So let's take on b4. So even though this is a fork, he could go bishop c5, trying to fork both of my rooks, which he didn't, but it just wouldn't have worked. Now in this position, he took a free pawn. My goal is to play chess with as much pieces as possible. So because my rook on f8 is not doing anything, I'm going to play the move rook to a8, getting my rook in the game. And then once he moves his bishop, I'm going to be able to play a move like rook to a3. But rook to a3 would be bad because then I'm just securing my own pieces. But let's say we play rook to a3, right? If he dares to put his king here, I win the bishop. Now, if he puts the king here, my rook is able to check. And then if he pulls his king back, I'm able to move and guard my bishop. So let's go rook to a3. So don't keeping your pieces in danger like this if you're not exactly sure what's happening. He decided to play king to c2. This is called a fork. By the way, the king is exposed, the bishop is unprotected, the king and the bishop is on the same line. My knight guards the c3 square. So I'm actually, do I play rook c4 or rook c3? They both work. Rook c3 checks the king, hit the bishop. The king now has to go here. I'm looking for a checkmate first, not seeing the checkmate, which means I'll take the bishop. I'm completely winning in this position. He moves the king, and then my goal from here is to deliver a checkmate. I'm trying to check here. If the king goes here, I check here. The king is going to be forced to go here, and then that's going to be a checkmate. Ensure that you saw this. Let's give a check. Well, the opponent resigns. So now we're playing with the white pieces. I already played pawn to e4. Now I'm going to be playing pawn to d4. And this is for my London system players out there. Now, my opponent plays knight to c6, which it's not an accurate move. I'm able to play a move like pawn to d5 actually, which would gain space and force the opponent to move the same piece more than once. But because I want to cater to my London system players, let's play the move knight to f3. And this is basically me trying to play the London system. So after pawn to d5, I'm actually going to play the move bishop to f4 here. The London system is like the easiest opening to play. For some reason, I don't like it because of the fact that it's too easy to learn, but it's a decent way to play. My opponent plays pawn to f6, which is his first mistake. Now, it looks like he wants to play pawn to e5 and attack my bishop, but I'm covering the square with three of my pieces. He's only covering the square with two of his pieces, and that does not work. So I'm just going to continue with the regular London system setup, pawn to e3. And if you notice, all I'm trying to do is develop all my minor pieces. So any opening that you're going to learn, you want to ensure that it follows the principles of chess. Now, with the London system, it's something that you can play against anything, and you put the pieces on the same square. The bishop goes to d3, the knight goes to d2, you castle your king, and that's a successful London. Whoa, he plays pawn to g5. Another mistake. First of all, this is a premature attack. You shouldn't be starting an attack this early. Second of all, I want you guys to notice how he's exposing this diagonal, pointing towards his king. And there's a part of me who wants to sacrifice my knight and then check him here. But his king is able to run, and I won't be gaining anything. So I'm just going to be pulling back my bishop. And he could continue with moves like h5, but that wouldn't actually work. He plays knight to h6. Another mistake, by the way, you should not be putting your knights on the edge of the board. I'm just going to be continuing with my regular London system setup, developing my bishop. Now I have three of my pieces developed. The goal from here, castle my king, get my knight developed. He plays the move bishop to g4. And what I want you guys to keep in mind is whenever a piece is on your half of the board, you want to ensure that you immediately put the question to that piece, especially if it is pinning your knight to your queen. So let's play h3. If it's pinning your knight to your king, it's usually best to just castle. That's a good way to deal with it. But your queen, you don't want to do it like that. He took my knight, which is another mistake, because for one, you don't want to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. And two, bishops are better than knights. So giving up your bishop for a knight this early on in the game is not good. And then my opponent made another mistake, moving the knight to b4. Now, he is moving the same piece more than once in the opening stage of the game. And the thing is, though, he is attacking my bishop. So even though bishops are better than knights, I do not want to move my bishop. Remember what I told you guys about the drawback principle? If I move my bishop away, he's going to take my pawn and then I'm forked. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to simply use the time to finish my development. Now, all my minor pieces are developed and I managed to move my queen, which means all I need to do from here is castle my king and my rooks are going to be connected. But obviously, my opponent played another mistake. In chess, just don't do what this guy's doing and you should be fine. Avoid moving the same pieces so many times in the opening. All of these are called unnecessary pawn moves. Plus, my opponent does not know how to count because I'm actually covering the square two times. He's only guarding the square once. But instead of taking on f4 and trading like this, I'm actually going to start by playing the move queen to h5, checking the opponent's king. Because now if he moves the king, I'm happy with that. I'm still able to win a pawn and he's not able to get castle. If he blocks with his knight, which he did, now I'm able to take with the bishop. His knight is not able to fork on c2 anymore. His knight on f7 is pinned, and because the knight is pinned, I'm threatening to pp on the pp. Okay, I'm going to stop saying that. I'm going to stop saying that. I just want you guys to see how obvious it is when a piece is pinned, you want to put pressure on the pin piece. Now, my opponent plays queen to d6, which is another mistake because he just did not see my bishop. And that's just a free queen. So let's just take on d6 here. And I mean, it doesn't really matter what he plays next. My plan was to play bishop to e6 and apply pressure to his pinned knight. He took with the pawn. The knight is pinned. Let's go bishop here. Apply pressure to the bishop. I'm sure this is what he wanted. He wanted me to move my bishop away from guarding c2 so that way he's able to fork. But no, it's too late. He doesn't have a queen. He's going to be checkmated. Taking on c2 will not affect me. So he moves the king out the way. Let's just take the knight. Again, if he takes on c2, I'll just move my king, and then the knight is going to be trapped. He took. Let's move the king. The knight is actually trapped on a1, so I actually do not need to take that knight. It's actually better for me to do like more productive moves. For example, knight takes d5, getting as much pieces in the attack. And instead of taking the knight, I could play rook to c1, getting my rook on this line so that way I can do an attack this way. Okay, he puts his knight on c2. He just wants to give me the knight, so let's just take the knight. I need to get my rook in the game though, on this open line. He plays pawn to b5. Let's get the rook on c1 on this open file. I'm just trying to find a way to checkmate his king, and I think I have a very nice idea. I want to play knight to f6. Knight f6 would be threatening a checkmate on d8 if my rook covers this file. So first thing I'm going to do is move my king. Now I'm able to show you guys. He plays b4. Here's it. Hit him with a move like knight to f6. If he does not take my knight, queen to e8 is just a checkmate. No. If he decides to take my knight, it opens up this rank on e7. And then once his pawn takes, queen to d7 becomes a checkmate. So let's hit him with knight to f6. He plays rook to b5, which means that's a checkmate, but that's also a checkmate. We're not playing with the white pieces. I'm going to play the move e4. My opponent plays e5. Let's develop the knight, hit the pawn, he guards it, and we will be playing an Italian game. Now, he's playing the two knights defense. I want to ensure that I throw in a fried liver attack. So the fried liver attack is knight to g5 whenever they play the two knights defense. The fried liver attack is not like the best line in the world. My opponent plays bishop to c5 very, very quickly. And this is actually one of the ways in which you guys could beat the fried liver attack. It's very, very instructive. Unfortunately, I kind of know how to react to this. And whenever someone plays the Traxler counter attack, knight takes f7 is actually a mistake. You think you're parking the queen and the rook, and then all you need to do is play king to f1 and you're fine. But it actually does not work like that. Best move in this position is to actually play bishop takes f7, and then you'll be fine because you're forcing the opponent's king to move. You're preventing the opponent's king from getting castled. And then once the opponent's king moves out the way, that's when we're going to pull our bishop back. Now we're threatening to play knight to f7 because keep in mind, the queen on d8 will no longer be able to move to h4. So now that he plays h6, no, I'll hit him with knight to f7. Hitting the queen, hitting the rook. There's no sacrificial ideas. He plays queen to f8, so I still need to be careful. If I grab the rook, he sack, I take, and then that's a double check, and I'm going to get checkmated. That's how dangerous this line is. However, I'm still going to take the rook because if he sacks, I'm just not going to take the bishop. He decided to take my knight, so okay, I'm not going to castle my king just yet because my pawn on e4 is unprotected, but I'm still going to solve this issue with a principled move. So for example, I'm going to play the move knight c3, so I'm not necessarily wasting any time, and I'm going to castle, move my pawn, develop my bishop, and I'll be fine. Now, for anybody below 1,000, I still recommend you try the fried liver attack, and if you see the fried liver attack, I recommend the Traxler counter attack. He plays knight to d4, which is a mistake in the opening stage of the game. You don't want to be moving the same pieces more than once. I mean, his bishop is not yet developed. What I'm going to do though, I'm not going to move my bishop because I'm ahead by 3 points. I want to trade. Instead, I'm going to castle my king, getting my king off the center of the board with the whole idea of attacking his king that is in the center of the board. Took on b3. Now I'm going to take with the a pawn. Taking with the a pawn opens this file for my rook. And then I now only have one piece that needs to be developed, which is this bishop on c1. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind, I'm ahead by 3 points. Because I'm ahead by 3 points, every trade that I get the chance to put my hand on, I'll accept it. Not pawn trades though. If you're winning, don't trade pawns, trade pieces. If you're losing, trade pawns, not pieces, which it's basically saying if you're winning, you should simplify. If you're losing, you should complicate. Looks like my opponent is going to be disconnected. If he is, then I'll cut the video. My opponent left the game. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. So d4 was played, and okay, we're at 5, 5, 6. So let's throw in an England gambit in the mix. I'm gonna be playing other openings as well. Now, the whole idea of the England gambit is once they accept the gambit, you can start winning material. Now, I'm just gonna tell you guys this information so you can research it. I'm not gonna play it, but you can actually win the opponent's queen by playing bishop to c5. If they play knight f3, you play d6. If they take the pawn, you play knight e7, sacrifice the knight. And if they take your knight, you play bishop takes f2. The king has to take, and then queen takes d1, wins the queen. But I'm just going to play knight to c6. So feel free to use that clip and do your research, see how you win the queen. The opponent plays knight to f3. Now, he's trying to guard the pawn on e5. No, I'm going to play the move queen to e7. All of this is mainline. It's the whole point of the England gambit. And if you're playing against the England gambit, then yeah, don't try to hold on to the e5 pawn. I recommend something like this or even knight c3. But let's just take back our pawn on e5. I'm not losing, obviously, but the downside of my position is the fact that I played queen to e7, which means I'm going to be having issues developing my queen, especially since he plays this knight c3 move. He is targeting my d5 square. So now I have to play pawn c6 to ensure that the knight does not go to the d5 square. Now, the England gambit is a very, very fun line with some very, very fun traps. Even Magnus fell for the England gambit when he was like 8 years old, I think. But it's not something that I recommend that you use as your main weapon. Like, use the England gambit every now and again to trick your friend, but don't be playing a tournament or playing a lot of games with it. Now, my opponent plays the move queen to d4, which is attacking my knight. I could simply take his knight. I could simply move my knight. I am behind in development though, so I'm trying to get as much development in as I possibly can. So I'm actually going to play the move pawn to d6, just protecting my knight. So if he takes, I takes, and then I'll be attacking his queen. The downside of me playing d6 though is I'm blocking in my bishop, so I also have to solve that problem. So don't be playing the N1 gambit if you don't know how to solve these problems. He plays pawn e4. That's already an indication that he's trying to develop his dark squared bishop. And now I'm just going to develop my bishop. So knight f6 is a decent move, but especially since I'm a bit behind in development, I'm actually going to play the move bishop to g4. It's a more forcing move because I develop my bishop and I'm immediately threatening to win the game. And obviously, my opponent blundered. Hopefully, you saw what the move is, but I'm actually not going to take with the knight. Now, he just does not know how to count, basically, because I have two pieces hitting the knight. He only has one piece guarding the knight. Now, which piece I use to take the knight is important. If I use the knight, he takes, I takes, I'm ahead by a pawn. I don't want a pawn. So I'm actually going to use my bishop to take the knight. If he dares to take back my bishop, which he did, then knight takes f3. That's just a fork, and I'm winning his queen. So if you're not able to put yourself in trouble and get out of trouble, don't play the N1 gambit. My opponent resigns. Let's keep going. My opponent plays e4. I'm going to try the Scandinavian again because it transposed into American, and then another person is transposing the Scandinavian into a Caracan. But don't worry, my Scandinavian players, it will happen. Somebody's going to take the pawn. But for now, we're not playing the Scandinavian. This is the Caracal. He plays pawn to d4, and here we're going to play the move pawn to c5, targeting d4. And if you've been watching the video, you should know the plan in the Caracal is to target the d4 pawn. The opponent quickly took on c5. We're not afraid of this, by the way. Like, we don't necessarily have to quickly play e6 and take back the pawn. We could first play knight c6 and attack the e pawn instead. Now, my opponent plays pawn to c4. He's playing very aggressively. If I take this pawn, he's going to take this pawn. So what I'm going to do is, well, I could actually take, and if queen takes, I takes, and if takes, I go knight here, and that's threatening a fork. But let's just play e6. Principled stuff. Now I want to take on c5. If he takes, I simply take back. I'm now threatening both e5 and c5. He decided to guard his e5 pawn. Now all I'm going to do is develop my bishop, take the free pawn. My pawn on d5 is an isolated pawn though, so hopefully you guys know what an isolated pawn is. So my opponent plays knight f3. He is developing his pieces. And my next move is going to be queen to b6, not knight to e7. Knight e7 is a good move, and knight e7 is coming. Queen b6 is a development move, but I develop a piece and I attack something at the same time. Basically, this is called a battery, two pieces pointing together to attack f2, and I'm also attacking b2. He did not try to protect any of them. And I'm actually thinking if I take on b2, I'm threatening a checkmate. However, if I take on b2, he's just going to move the knight. So let's just take on f2. The king now has to move to e2 or f2, and I'm just winning. Now, because he moves the king to d2, his b2 pawn is unprotected, the rook is unprotected, the king is exposed. I'm going to hit him with queen takes b2, attacking the king, hitting the unprotected rook. This is called a fork. Where is he going to put the king though? Do I want his rook? The king has no squares. He has to block with the queen, and I'm not going to take the rook because that's just a checkmate. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. D4 was played. We already tried the tricky England gambit, so let's just play D5 here and just play regular solid chess. The opponent plays E3. It is an indication that he's probably trying to play like a stonewall setup. He did block in his bishop though, so let me just develop my knight. We always want to be developing when we're playing. He develops his knight to C3. Now, there's one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, and this is actually important because a lot of players make this mistake. Like everybody's always putting their knight on c6 and then blocking out their c pawn. Like if the guy plays d4 and you play d5, you have to move your c pawn. You have to at least put it on c6 to guard d5. Let's say they play c4, or at least put it on c5 to attack their center. And you should not be afraid of them taking on c5 because you're going to be left with two pawns in the center. They're going to have one pawn in the center, and it's a very easy pawn to regain. My opponent played knight e5, which is a mistake. You don't want to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. I'm just going to continue with principles. Let's just play knight c6 here, applying some pressure to the knight. I'm not afraid of bishop to b5. Like two pieces is not going to tap me and checkmate me and the game just begin. Whoa, my opponent left the game. I guess this is going to be some stuff that's a part of the speedrun because I do not want to skip any of the games. I'm playing against my first 600 rated player and I'm 597. Let's play pawn to e4. Then after e5, I'll develop my knight, hit the pawn. He guards the pawn. And because I already played an Italian game, I'm going to play pawn to d4. And this is called the Scotch game. Now, after they take on d4, I could take back on d4, and then it's actually a Scotch game. But I can also play the move bishop to c4, and then this is going to be called a Scotch gambit. Now, after the opponent plays bishop to c5, and you're going to be seeing this a lot, you actually want to play the move pawn to c3, letting them thinking, okay, why is this guy giving me a pawn? But that's not a pawn. Black is actually losing. I want you to notice how the bishop is unprotected. Yes, that is taking my pawn, but I am actually able to play the move bishop takes f7, checking his king, preventing his king from castling. Now, ensure you don't just sacrifice a piece just to prevent your opponent's king from castling with no intention of winning back the piece. After he plays king to f7, I'm going to hit him with queen to d5, hitting the king and the unprotected bishop. The king now has to move. I'll simply grab the bishop and then I'll be doing fine. I will not be ahead in material, but his king will not be castled. And because the king is not castled, it's going to be easier to attack his king. So let's take on c5 in this position. He decided to develop his knight and didn't take on b2. And instead of taking on b2 with the queen, especially since I have been moving my bishop more than once, moving my queen more than once, I'm going to play the move knight to c3. Just developing my knight so that way, once I castle my king and develop my bishop, my development is complete. He plays b6, attacking my queen. I'm going to play the move queen to h5, checking the king. And I don't mind if he plays pawn to g6 because now I'm able to play queen to h6. That's a good score for the queen. I mean, I know his king wasn't able to get castled anyways, but his king is a bit locked in now. And I'm going to play moves like bishop g5, pinning this knight, getting my king out the center of the board, and then start an attack on his king. So he develops his bishop. Let me develop my bishop so that way this knight is not able to move, which means this knight is pinned. How is he going to let out his queen? Once I castle my king, I'll get my rooks in the game, and then every single piece is going to be participating. He plays pawn to d6. Let's castle the king because I'm a very principled person. He plays queen to d7. Maybe he thinks he's able to castle on the queen side, but if you move your king, you're just not able to get castle. Now, I actually wanted to play knight d5, but the knight is no longer pinned. So here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm actually going to play rook to e1, putting my rook on the same line as his king. So that way, if I'm able to play knight d5, I could open this file. So he plays knight e5, which is not a bad move. But once I take his knight and his pawn takes, my a rook is now able to join the game with tempo on his queen. So I want you guys to look on my position. I want you guys to look on my pawns. I want you guys to look on my king. I'm not moving the pawns around my king. I'm not making unnecessary pawn moves. I ensure that every single piece had made a move and is playing a role in the attack. My opponent now played queen to e6. Decent move, playable move. I'm now contemplating between knight b5 and knight d5, but because it's very important to control the center, I'm going to play the move knight d5. I'm automatically attacking his knight twice. I'm threatening moves like knight to f6, which could lead to a checkmate. And regardless of how he takes, I'm just going to take with the pawn, which means my e rook is now open, pointing towards his king, and my pawn is attacking his queen. If he decides to take a free pawn, that's a suicide mission because like there's no way he's not gonna get checkmate if he takes that pawn. So he didn't. He pulled his queen back to f7. I still need to ensure that I open as much line, so I'm thinking of d6. But because the queen goes to f7 and no longer guard this pawn, rook takes e5 will just be winning material. Because the knight is pinned, I'm already applying pressure to the pinned knight, and there's just nothing you could do to not lose the knight. He's also going to be losing his queen. He moves his rook to d8, and this is where the game will end. So I take the knight. Let's take the knight. He has to sack his queen. Now we take the queen, hit the rook. The king now has to take. And then how do I checkmate him? I'm thinking of checking here, which is actually nice, but then his king runs here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to play pawn to d6. If he takes with the pawn, his king is not able to run there. He took with the pawn. Now, okay, how do I do this? Check him here. The king has to go here. Do I check him here? The king has to go here. But let's check him here. It's usually best to pull the opponent's king in the center of the board. He puts the king here. Now I check here, just pulling him closer and closer in the center of the board. And this should lead to at least some checkmate. So for example, okay, I'm not going to check. I'm going to play b4 because his king is always escaping to the c5 square. So I just want to cover the c5 square. He moves his rook to e8. I need to be careful because he's threatening some sort of checkmates, but that's actually a blunder because now I can actually take the rook and then after he takes, I check, but he's able to block. So it's not a blunder. So if I check here, the king moves here. Where's my checkmate? Okay, let's check here. That's the move. Because if he blocks with the rook, I take the rook. If he moves the king, which he did, I take this rook. And after he takes, I take back. And this is just going to be complete winning. From here, you guys know what the idea is. I'm going to take the pawn. For example, okay, instead of taking the pawns, I'm going to play f4. This is actually important. This is a pawn majority, and I'm just going to advance my pawn majority and create a new queen. And once I have a new queen on the board, it's going to be easier for me to checkmate him. So let's just pre-move to a queen. Now I have the queen on the board. Now I'm going to get my queens very close to his king, like this, very close to his king. And this is where the checkmate is going to come. Let's give a check here. King has to go there. The take, thought that was a checkmate, but he's able to go here. But that's the checkmate.